Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 142 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, college football fans and Husker fans.
Hello, everybody. We are here today to talk to you about the results of the conference championship games, who the 4-team playoff is going to be, and those big games we have coming up, as well as some of the big bowl games, and the news about the 2024 college football playoff. So, a lot to get to today.
Yes, it is another dynamic period of change in college football.
Yes, because we haven't had enough of those recently.
No, right, exactly.
All right. And we'll add in a little bit of a Nebraska news at the end for the Husker fans out there.
That sounds like a good plan.
Good. But before we dive into all that, Dad, I believe you have a special beverage this week.
Well, so yeah, since we started this podcast, Alex, we've always kind of done the, open a beer at the beginning of it. And I'm going to broaden that now from that. And the basis of that obviously was historically, we would have been having this conversation at the end of a college football Saturday where you and I were able to enjoy some quality time together and watch a number of games. And then we would talk about it either on Saturday or Sunday. And oftentimes I might be having a cold beverage, a cold adult beverage, and you'd be having whatever it was that you were drinking as a child, and we just sit there and talk. Now, since we've been doing this podcast, it's always been to pop open a beer, but I want to broaden that to include liquor as well, and so that when I'm not inclined to pop a beer, because it's as we do this podcast, it's 9:45 in Eastern Time Zone where I'm located, and so I am having my final hot toddy of the day here, and today I'm drinking some Traverse City Whiskey Company straight bourbon. It's bourbon from our hometown. It's fabulous small still house that actually has won quite a number of awards, including some national awards for the best small batch bourbon in the country. So anyway, I thought instead of opening and cracking a beer today, I would give a little shout out and recognition to one of my favorite liquor beverages, which is Traverse City Whiskey Company's aged straight bourbon.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I'm not going.
Ice.
Yeah, I'm not going as hard as you today. I just have my usual Kona Brewing Company Longboard Island Lager that I'm going to be cracking open here today.
All right.
But let's get to it.
Yeah, let's get to it. We're not changing it. It's just broadening the definition of our beverage.
All right, here we go.
And since we have a new coach, it's a new era. Seems like an appropriate time to make that switch happen.
I like it.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers to Matt Rule.
Yes, definitely. All right. So diving into the national side of things first, obviously we had the various college football conference championship games this past weekend. And we gave our predictions on how we thought they were going to play out. I was able to watch some of the games live and then others not because I was kind of traveling around this weekend. But there were a few good games and then some that, weren't as quite entertaining for the, average fan. But the first one that played out was USC-Utah, where both of us predicted that USC would win. I said 45-35, while you said 38-21. But it kind of started the weekend off on an ominous note for the favorites because USC got beat 24-47 in a game that really ran away from them in the fourth quarter.
Right. And it was probably the best demonstration of poor tackling, of just horrific tackling that I have witnessed since the Nebraska-Michigan game in Scott Frost's first year.
You did mention that.
Yes, it was just atrocious. I mean, atrocious. It's like they weren't trying. So I don't know. I don't know what was going on with USC's defense and what they were thinking. But I really think that game kind of demonstrated that USC still has a few steps in the rung that they have to climb. They're still a very talented team, but Utah is just a very disciplined, structured, and sound football team, and it's gonna be hard to play football for 60 minutes against them and not have them compete hard and be in the game with you. Now, they may make enough mistakes to lose, but they aren't going to do too much of that, right? And they're going to physically be in the game with you. It was a very impressive performance by Utah.
I would agree. And it started off really well for USC. They went up 17 to nothing, and then I think they had an opportunity to potentially go up 24 to nothing at one point. Get another touchdown, but they didn't get that. And then Utah started to make a comeback and made it 17-17 by halftime. And even into the beginning of the fourth quarter, it was still a close game, kind of back and forth both ways. But then, USC, I think Caleb Williams threw another interception. And like you say, when, USC's defense was getting out there, it was clear that Utah's dedication to the running game, which we always like to talk about, was having its effect because USC's defense looked dead tired out there. And like you say, there was some truly awful tackling. So Utah was able to score at will basically on them near the end.
Right. A little bit like the, shades of Michigan, Ohio State fourth quarter as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There are some similarities there. Well, and I'll talk about that again a bit later as well. But one of the other big games was Michigan. Talk about them. Michigan playing against Purdue. And Michigan won, which met our expectations. I said 38-24. Well, you said 42-24. And the final score ended up being 43-22. So you had it pretty much on the dot there in terms of the score. However, that's another one where Purdue, I think if you're a Purdue fan, you got to be, happy that your team kept it close. Their defense kept Michigan from scoring quite a number of times, and once again, it kind of got away from them in the fourth quarter, and Purdue's own offense was able to move the ball, but wasn't able to get touchdowns. I think they had 4 field goals over the course of the game, so hard to win just on that. But
midway through the second quarter, I believe, about midway through the second quarter, they took a lead. For a brief time. I think if I'm remembering the sequence of that game, Purdue did actually have a lead for a short period of time. Like I don't know if it was 13-10 or something like that, but I mean, they were definitely in the ball game through halftime.
Right. Well, I think at halftime it was 14-13, Michigan in the lead, if I'm not mistaken.
There you go. Yeah, I think you're right.
So you're right. It was close. And Purdue had 2 interceptions, which also kind of shot them in the foot. I know one at least was like near the end zone too, like when they were in scoring position.
Yep.
So Michigan managed to hang on, and get out of there with a solid W. And then you also had Georgia versus LSU, which we predicted that Georgia would win. I predicted kind of a lower scoring 24-13. You went higher scoring 38-31. Ended up being even higher than that of 50 Georgia to 30 LSU. So definitely not the low scoring affair that I was predicting. Georgia went up 35-10 by halftime. So, they were just really giving it to LSU, and it had. I will say that LSU was making some really weird mistakes or having luck kind of go not their way, because Georgia's first touchdown was off of a series where they stopped LSU's offense, forced them to kick a field goal, then they blocked the field goal, and LSU starts kind of like, walking away like the play is over, and the Georgia guy is like standing over the ball, like looking around for a second, and then he just picks up and goes along with a bunch of his buddies blocking for him. And LSU was like completely taken aback, not thinking that it was still a live ball, because it's a field goal, not an extra point. And so they take it back and score a touchdown. So instead of LSU getting 3 points, they got no points, and they got a gimme touchdown scored on them.
Right. Yep. That's exactly right. And how the field goal unit for LSU wasn't aware of that rule. I'm sure that in spring practice and even in fall camp, you go over all this situational football, and 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 throughout high school that's done. So most of those players, have been reviewed that rule and reviewed what they need to do. And if you're a part of the kickoff or the field goal unit, that's the rule. You're reminded of that, right? So the fact that so many of those players on that unit just behaved like they were shocked that Georgia picked it up and ran with it is beyond me. And now I get it. You oftentimes when that happens, somebody gets on it and just lands on the football, because it can also be advanced by the offensive team as well. So that's why a lot of times they'll just get on it, and then the play is over. But in this case, the Georgia guy was smart and picked it up and ran it back.
Yeah. And there was also a spot where the ball got fumbled and it bounced off a LSU's player's helmet who was laying on the ground, yes. And it popped up and the Georgia guy grabbed it, and secured the fumble. So that was just a weird situation there.
Yep. No, there's definitely some bounces of the ball, so to speak, that went Georgia's way. And here's another interesting thing now. As you say, because of those, though, Georgia was in control of that game from fairly early on, right? But the final score was, what was it? 50 to 30, right? So a 20-point, 3-touchdown victory. And that's about what Michigan final score was. And that game was a very different, how that played out was very different, right? You wouldn't have watched that Michigan Purdue game and describe the differential between the two teams is even remotely close to Georgia LSU, even though the final scores in terms of differential weren't that far apart.
Right. Well, and I didn't watch the game live. I just saw the highlights, but it looked to me like, because Georgia was so far ahead, they kind of took the pedal off the gas near the end. Like LSU scored pretty late in the game when it was already, decided, right?
Right.
So yeah, it was a dominant performance by Georgia, and I think a good boost of confidence for their offense, because their defense has been great all year, but their offense has struggled at times to really get its engine going. But Stetson Bennett had a great game in this one, and they were really able to move it on LSU and make it look like they're the number one team in the country.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. They definitely gained some momentum from that victory. But it was a good day of just enjoying some college football, though.
Yep. And this one was interesting. The one game where we predicted an upset in the conference championships games was Clemson, North Carolina, where I thought that North Carolina would narrowly win 31-30. You predicted a little bit more lopsided 31-21 victory for North Carolina. But that one ended up being a drumming of 39-10 of Clemson beating North Carolina. And a big reason for that was that Clemson switched to their second team quarterback. And turns out he did a much better job than the guy they'd been using all season.
Right. Exactly. And that starter that got benched has already moved into the portal.
Yep, I saw that.
Welcome to college football today.
I guess so. And there was also a pick six where North Carolina was like right about to score, and then they threw a pick six. So, that was another big swing of points right there. So good on Clemson. I'm actually happy that they won, because I generally like Clemson as a team. And they've had some ups and downs this year. Though even with this win, there was no chance of them getting into the Final Four for the playoff.
Right.
Yeah, and we've saved the best for last here, which was the TCU Kansas State game in the Big 12. I predicted that TCU would win 38-31. You predicted a higher scoring win for TCU of 48-35. But it ended up being a 31-28 victory in overtime. And it was definitely, in terms of entertainment value, it was definitely the best of the championship
Oh
games.
God! And Kansas State victorious.
Right. Well, yes. And, I honestly, I was cheering for TCU because, I wanted to avoid any, after USC lost, right? We knew, okay, Ohio State's probably in. So that means that we really need TCU to win, right, to prevent any possibility of Alabama sneaking their way into the playoff. With how it turned out in the end, which we'll talk about, that TCU stayed in the top four anyways. I'm actually happy that Kansas State got the win because obviously we have an attachment to Kansas State because Adrian Martinez, our former Nebraska quarterback, went to play there. And they're just the underdog team, right? They've sucked for a long time, but have really gotten together here under their newer coach. And really came to play today. Their defense was really impressive in how they were able to stuff TCU on multiple occasions.
Yep, I would agree. They were the more physical team, and the TCU had to come back from behind to beat them during the regular season, and they just couldn't do it this time. They almost did it. I just had so much fun watching TCU's quarterback literally putting that team on his back and trying to carry them and will them into victory, but he just couldn't quite get it done. And there's a number of pundits and people talking after the game about how is it possible that TCU's offensive quarterback or decision, whether it was the head coach or the offensive coordinator, did not put it in Dugan's hands, for that final play.
Right.
How do you not let that guy get it across there so that you can win the football game? So
right. Well, so yeah, I definitely wanted to mention that because they were down. It was 20-28, I believe.
Yep.
So they needed a touchdown and the 2-point conversion to tie it up near the end of the game. And this Max Duggan guy, their quarterback, who had thrown I believe two, or I think there was one interception, maybe one fumble. They had 2 turnovers earlier in the game, while Kansas State had one muffed punt that really cost them and kind of brought TCU back into the game, and KSU was in the lead.
Right.
So Max had a mixed game up to that point, but yeah, you're right. He really put the team on his back, was literally running every play, and when he finally did get in the end zone to score, I mean, the guy looked like he was about to puke. He was so exhausted.
He was.
But the commentators were like in awe of what they had just seen, and you could tell like, okay, if this is like a Heisman moment, right? This is it right here. Just, willing your team to go to overtime here.
Yep. But then in overtime, they got in a position to score in the overtime, and they were, they handed the ball off, turn around, hand the ball off 5 yards away from the line of scrimmage instead of letting him do a quarterback sneak,
right,
or do some kind of a run pass option, rollout situation where you flood the zone and see if you can get a guy open or something. But they didn't do that. They just tried to run a power play, and it got blown up.
Because on second down, he had another nice run and then he put the ball out and he nearly got the touchdown right there, but it was determined that he was just short. So they had like 2 feet to go.
Right.
And then it was, 3rd and 2 feet, and like you say, they ran the same play twice in a row where he handed off to the running back from 5 yards back, and Kansas State stopped it both times. They decided, we're not going to kick the field goal. We're going to go for the win here because
the win, right.
We're right here on the goal line. And there had been multiple injuries and long time to review some of those potential scoring plays and things like that. So Max had plenty of time to recover his stamina at that point. So you're not worried about him just doing a QB sneak, right, and just trying to push his way in there. Like, I don't know why they didn't do
Well,
that.
and with the new law, with the new rules in football that allow the push, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can now call a play, a quarterback sneak, where you can have, say, a tight end and a running back, and even a lineman who get themselves in a situation where through motion or whatever at the snap of the ball, you've got two or three guys pushing behind that quarterback to shove him physically, give him the extra power to push through and get him over the goal line when you're that close. That's a legal play. Until just a few years ago, that was never legal in football.
Mm-hmm.
Now it is. And so with that as in your available option, then that play should have been called.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, from there, it was easy for Kansas State to just play conservative and get the field goal for the win.
Right.
But it was definitely an exciting game, and I think the fact that TCU got into overtime was critical versus if they had just lost 20-28 in regulation, right? In terms of their perceptions, and when it came to that playoff committee and all that sort of stuff. Because we did have, two of the conference champions lose, right? We had USC lose and we had TCU lose, while Michigan and Georgia won. So we basically knew that Ohio State, who had been ranked fifth before, was going to get in. And then the question was, okay, does TCU stay in the top four, or does Alabama, who was sixth, somehow sneak its way in there? And I saw, once again, the commentators on that TCU game were basically saying, like, no, this TCU team deserves to still be in the top four. Those were all the comments I saw online. So I think the sentiment was very much in your camp that Alabama does have a prayer of getting in here.
But yet the Big Ten own network, Fox, during the halftime of the Big Ten conference championship game, gave Nick Saban a 10-minute window. Well, it's not 10, let's say 5-minute window to make his pitch for why his team deserved to be there. And his pitch was awful. But I understand why Nick Saban did it, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to advocate for your team. The people I'm mad at is I can't believe somebody should be fired for allowing that to happen at Fox Sports.
Right.
I'm serious. That's an unforgivable offense when you just threw the people who write your paycheck, who are your partner in this thing called college football, and you just threw them under the bus. And frankly, I don't care even if it was the other way around, that they were pitching Ohio State. You might have been able to understand that. But the bottom line is, if you're going to have any discussion about who's selected in the Final Four and that there are some teams that are kind of in the mix, if you're going to go with a segment like that during halftime, then you get every one of the teams represented who's in the mix, and you give all of them equal time. That would have been the appropriate way to handle that.
Right. Of course, like, some of the top people, right, like a Kirby Smart or whoever, from Georgia, were busy on that day because they were playing games on that Saturday.
Right, but Ohio State wasn't.
Well, that's true. You could have had Ryan Day on there too.
You could have had Ryan Day on there, and TCU had played earlier in the day, and if USC had been involved, they would that would have been the Friday night game. So I mean, the point is that as soon as there was a reach out from Alabama, Nick Saban's staff, to say, hey, we'd like to come on and make a pitch, then as the production people for that sports broadcast, knowing the influence that could have, you should have worked to find equity, right? To give equal time to the likely players involved. So you would have had to reach out to TCU and Ohio State right away and get those three schools, and maybe even Tennessee, 4 schools, and then give every one of those guys 2 minutes instead of giving 5 or 6 minutes to Nick Saban to make a stupid pitch for his team that had no business being considered.
Right. Especially since turns out that in earlier parts of the season he had said that this Alabama team like wasn't a playoff ready
Oh,
team. You know.
right. Yeah, he had already. Yeah, I mean, uh, and again, I don't necessarily fault Nick Saban. I fault all the networks, ESPN included, and Fox Sports, who because they just kowtowed and bowed to the ring of the goat. Okay, to let him come on and speak,
Mm-hmm.
and that should not ever be the case. There should be equity in that situation, recognizing the power of the medium. And if anybody should know that and understand the power of that medium, it's the people involved, right? It's the networks. And yet they didn't do that. And that's just another example of how I hate the way the media plays this up. And I'm going to probably get on this a little bit later in the podcast. So I'll shut up.
All right. This was an interesting sentiment I saw in the discussion, especially after USC lost, and it was that this switch that the Pac-12 and the Big 12 have made, where they don't have divisions, right? Or they just have their, like the two best teams, play each other at the end of the year.
Yep.
Or maybe that's just the Big 12, because I'm not sure if the Pac-12 does it too, but
Now, the Pac-12 has divisions still.
right. Okay, I thought so. Well, I guess it was more about the Big 12, but basically, that had really screwed them in multiple scenarios before, right? Because, right, like with Ohio State, they're the second best team in the conference, and they didn't play in the conference championship game, so they still had just their one loss and were kind of sitting pretty outside of this mix and were able to get in when somebody above them lost. And the same's happened to
Right.
Alabama in the past.
Exactly.
To
Right.
benefit them. Whereas with this system where everybody plays everybody, you don't kind of get that same possibility of scenarios where everybody just beats each other up. I think the point with the Pac-12 wasn't, I guess, about the divisions, but just more so how, the circle of suck, right, within the Pac-12, how
Right.
everybody has lost to everybody at a certain point, and they've Utah had played spoiler like that last year, and I think maybe in 2019 as well. There's been several times now where basically they have spoiled the chances of the potential Pac-12 champion to get into the playoff.
No, it's true, because think about it, when you have the open arrangement like the Big 12 currently has, they are playing truly the 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 two best teams in the conference are playing each other, regardless of whether they played each other earlier in the season or even played each other the previous week. There's been an occasion where I believe Oklahoma played a team 2 weeks in a row. You know what I mean? Like they played the exact same team twice, right? Back to back.
Right.
And that was always the fear with Ohio State and Michigan in the Big Ten, where they would be, if history as our guide, there might have been a number of years over the last 10 or 12 years where, frankly, Michigan and Ohio State were the two best teams in the conference, and they would have been playing each other in back-to-back weeks every one of those years, just based on when they play the Ohio State Michigan game. So if they don't have divisions, they may have to concede the Michigan Ohio State game being on that final weekend, for fear that, just based on history, you run the risk of having to play that great team and get up to play that great team 2 weeks in a row. And probably neither school is real giddy about that.
Right. That's definitely true. So in terms of the final playoff ranking, obviously, right, like the main source of discussion was what was going to happen with TCU, and what would the rankings be? Because if it had been 1 Georgia, 2 Michigan, 3 Ohio State, 4 TCU, if TCU had dropped a spot because of their loss, then you would have had a rematch of Michigan and Ohio State in the semifinal. But I think the playoff committee wanted to avoid that, so they basically kept TCU at number 3 despite their loss. So it went 1 Georgia, 2 Michigan, 3 TCU, 4 Ohio State. So Michigan and TCU are still going to play each other like we've talked about previously. That's going to be in the Fiesta Bowl. And then Ohio State's going to play Georgia in the Peach Bowl, which is in Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Well, so, my thoughts. Well, what are your thoughts on that, Alex?
I mean, personally, I'm glad, given what happened with USC, right? Obviously, they weren't going to get in. And Ohio State made sense to get in because they only had the one loss to, number 2 Michigan, right? So I was fine with all that. And I'm glad that they kept the rankings the way they did, even if, maybe like on a, purely, merits based level, right? Maybe Ohio State does deserve to be above TCU because they lost. But I would far prefer this set of matchups where the two teams from the same conference aren't playing each other right away, and we have more interesting matchups that way. And the potential, if both of them won, of Michigan and Ohio State, the two big rivals, playing each other in the national championship game, which would be a cool story in and of itself.
Yeah. And like you said, like probably for the first time in history, that predates, 1895 or something.
Right. Because they've back in 2006 they were number 1 and number 2 going into the final game of the regular season, but you still had, the conference championship game to come and the postseason, right? So yeah, because of how it works, they've never played each other literally for the national championship before.
Right. They've never played each other in the Rose Bowl, for example, and things of that nature, where end of season kind of situation. So
yeah, so no, I'm happy with the rankings, and I think, obviously I think that because the Peach Bowl is in Atlanta, Georgia, it's kind of a home field advantage to Georgia, which apparently they had that in the conference championship game just now and another game earlier in their season, so they've really been benefiting from that Mercedes-Benz stadium, I guess.
Right.
But I think they both have the potential to be good matchups. And I think I'd be interested to see, because last year in 2021, Michigan and Georgia did play each other in the playoff, and Georgia won that pretty solidly. But it'd be interesting to see a rematch of that in the national championship, where I would say this Michigan team is better than the one from last year.
Gotcha. Well, I would say that this Michigan team has the potential to play better than last year's team did for a number of reasons. I don't know if I am prepared to say they're better than last year's team, because I think there are some areas where they're better and some areas where they're worse. Right. So it's a trade-off. And as a matchup, maybe they're a better matchup with Georgia than they were last year. And there's maybe a greater chance that game could be entertaining, because Michigan pretty much got beat down by Georgia last year. And that may very well happen again this year if that matchup ends up happening. But I'm curious, like you said, Ohio State now has to play Georgia in the first game of the playoff of the Final Four, and they have to do it basically as a home game for Georgia. But frankly, that's the way it should be. They weren't conference champions. The other, the others played in their conference championships at least, right? So Michigan, frankly, kind of benefited from this whole scenario, because I don't think they would have been happy to play Ohio State again right away, just because the chances of beating Ohio State 2 times in a row, is obviously pretty tough to do, because the other team who lost is obviously going to make an adjustment. Ohio State could not have, if they came out with a similar defensive game plan, then heads would roll, right? So I mean, they just were. It was an atrocious defensive game plan that they put together for the Michigan game, and I guess I should caveat that it was an acceptable game plan to go in, but you had to know that it was probably a game plan that you were going to have to abandon at some point and shift back to a more traditional defense, so that once Michigan made an adjustment, you wouldn't get beat up, which is what happened, because they refused to adjust. And that is on Ohio State. But anyway, I guess my point is that Michigan TCU is probably the better matchup for Michigan. And Georgia would have loved to have seen TCU also. So Georgia's probably disappointed that they now have to play an Ohio State team that, yes, is 12-1. Their only loss is to number 2 Michigan, and is certainly capable, talent-wise, of matching up with Georgia, and frankly, might present more problems for Georgia's defense than Michigan does.
Right. Well, it will be interesting because, I see some similarities between Michigan and Georgia, and that the defense is kind of the real strength of both their teams. And they have, a pretty run focused offense, but with, a passing threat that you need to be worried about. And, we saw how Michigan was able to exploit that with Ohio State. Now, to your point from earlier, I think it'd be crazy if Ohio State came into this Georgia game with a similar, let's dare them to throw it, right? Especially after Stinson Bennett had this 50-point game against LSU, right? I don't think they would try that. But they certainly, like you say, they have the athletes to, for the most part, keep up with the Georgia and make it interesting. So I agree. I think they're both interesting matchups. I definitely favor Georgia in the Peach Bowl and the Fiesta Bowl. I favor Michigan, but it's definitely, my confidence in them isn't as strong as Georgia. That's what I would say.
Right. I would agree. I think that's a good assessment.
All right. There we go. And we'll give proper predictions on those games when we're closer to the actual date. We'll obviously be in person for the holidays here coming up, so that'll be fun.
Well, and there is and there's there's another reason why we're going to wait, and that reason is the portal is going crazy, even among the teams who are playing in these New Year's Day 6 bowls that we're about to review, and heck. There are even some players who are playing in the Final Four teams that are making changes now, that are choosing not to play, and those types of things, right, even in those 4 games. And some of that is because genuinely they need to get injuries addressed and things of that nature. But with a little off-season surgery or something, and I get that. That's kind of historic, right? But that's happens for years. But I'm just amazed at the amount of portal entry that's occurring, even among the New Year's Day 6 bowls, not the Final Four, but the New Year's Day 6.
Right. Yep. Well, it's just a continuation of the trend we've been discussing for a while now, that the bowls are becoming less relevant, and with the news of the 12-team playoff coming in 2024, they'll become really irrelevant at that point in time. So, better enjoy them while we can here, guys.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that's going to become less relevant is if you look at any of the summaries, right, of the 12-team playoff and how that would have played out this year if it already existed. Right? What does that do, or what would that have done to the Michigan Ohio State game? What would it have meant to the final games of some of the other teams? USC, Notre Dame, for example, or and then obviously the conference championship games. Now those conference championship games will truly be just about conference championship and positioning within the top 12.
Right. Well, there is something significant to that with conference championships specifically that we'll get to later. But before we get to that, we're going to quickly go over a couple of the bigger bowl games and what those matchups are.
Okay.
Because those are always fun to look at. Kansas State's reward for winning the Big 12 and upsetting TCU is that they get to play Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. So I must say I'm wishing them good luck. I'd love nothing more than for them to win that, but that'll be a hard one, I think.
Well, it will be, but there have been like 5 or 6 significant departures already in the portal from Alabama, including a starting offensive lineman.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I've not been following the portal news as much as you, clearly. So,
Yeah. Well, there have been some. I mean, certainly some backups, some guys, some 4 and 5 star guys from that are younger players or whatever, or players that maybe are in their second year and feel like, gosh, I'm already getting passed over or whatever at Alabama, that have chosen to go to the portal. But even starters are leaving.
hmm um, this is an interesting one. In the Orange Bowl, it's going to be Tennessee and Clemson. And I think that's
Yes.
a pretty good matchup for the talent level of both those teams, right? They've both
Oh,
had some ugly losses this year, but clearly also have a lot of talent. So I think that'll be a good one.
absolutely. I agree. I think that'll be a good one, especially given what happened at Clemson there with the change of quarterbacks, and how that kind of breathed new life into Clemson.
Yeah. And this one's interesting. In the Cotton Bowl, you have USC going up against Tulane, who I believe won their conference within the group of 5. So, I am curious because Caleb Williams, their star quarterback, was hurt at the end of that USC game. I'm not sure how serious that injury is, but whether he's at full capacity or not could be a big deal for that game.
Absolutely, I agree. And so that's the thing, is that's why I don't want to make any predictions on these. Is first we need to look at injuries, but now we also have to look at departures from these teams that are not in the Final Four and determine the case. I'm trying to think of even Michigan. I think has lost a couple of quarterbacks. Iowa, I know they're not a New Year's Day 6, but they've lost 2 of their quarterbacks to the portal already. So all of a sudden, some teams are going to be super thin in certain spots.
Right. We also have in the Rose Bowl, Penn State versus Utah, the third kind of best team in the Big Ten, right? Going
Yeah,
up against the Pac-12 champ.
yeah, that will be actually a pretty interesting game, I think, because I mean I'm a big fan of Utah, and I would think they would be the favorite, let's say,
Yep.
but Penn State's enormously talented and is going to have a month to prepare for them, and they're a young football team, Penn State, and I just wonder how much they might improve in that period of time.
That's certainly possible, and different for Utah being the favorite, right? Because they're ranked 8th while Penn State is 11th, versus in the USC game, they were the underdog. Even though, well, I'm not actually 100% sure if they were the underdog because Utah did beat USC earlier in the season by like 1 point. But I think the perception was that USC had gotten better in that time. So,
Yes, exactly. That was what we thought.
and then this one's interesting. The losers of 2 of the conference championship games, LSU versus Purdue in the Citrus Bowl.
Yes, yes. Now I'm gonna tell you again. It's in the humidity of the South, um, and I just I don't view that as a very great matchup. Uh, you know, Purdue probably just does not have the athletes to hang with them. Now maybe they'll prove me wrong. They always compete. I mean, those the Purdue teams, their coaching staff is outstanding. They'll have those guys ready to play and ready to fight, right? And maybe LSU will be mailing it in a little bit because they're disappointed in how their season ended up. There's always a possibility with a bowl game, but LSU is enormously talented.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely give the edge to LSU, but at the same time, I thought Michigan would solidly beat Purdue, and Purdue hung in there for 3 quarters with them, so you
Exactly.
never know.
Yep, you're
Um,
exactly right.
Yep. And similarly to the playoff games, we'll go more in depth on all the various bowl games on a later podcast, give our predictions and all that good stuff. We also had the Heisman candidates get announced. I saw some kind of discussion that this is kind of a bit of a lackluster Heisman year, right? Because nobody's, had a real superstar type year, right? Everybody's had 1 or 2 losses, I guess, except for here, Stenson Bennett, from Georgia is included in the list. So he's undefeated, but people haven't perceived him as like, a superstar, right? He's just really competent overall.
Right.
But you have him, Max Duggan from TCU, CJ Stroud from Ohio State, and Caleb Williams from USC.
Right. And it'll be very interesting to see But I wonder if this is going to be more indicative of how things are going forward in the future. And I almost wonder if the Heisman Trophy organization, the Heisman New York Downtown Athletic Club, might consider changing the timing of their decision now that the 12-team playoff is happening. That's just something to ponder.
Yeah, no, well, because the votes, I believe, started happening after the end of the regular season. So,
Correct.
I think there's probably going to be a lot of momentum for Caleb Williams because he had a really great game against Notre Dame, right? And then had a
Yep.
not so great game in this conference championship game, but probably quite a few people voted before they saw that. Um, I would agree. I mean, I think, it should be evaluating the entire season. So I would suggest it should happen after the national championship personally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they're going to change it, that would be the timing, right? You go ahead and delay it all the way until then, except that it has always been historically in this, early December timeframe. It's the same day as the Army Navy game. I mean, there's a lot of tradition there. So I don't know if there's too much tradition for that to change. But now you have a situation where you pick a Heisman Trophy winner, and let's say their team is still in the 12-team playoff or whatever, but then they get beat in the first round, and then somebody else just becomes a superstar over the following two games and wins, wins the national championship and is clearly the best player when it mattered the most. And voila, you pick the wrong guy again, right? So it just seems like from the awards integrity, it might be worth it to shift that thing to sometime in January.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Well, because now, we'll discuss this, but we have the 12-team playoffs starting in the 2024 season, which now means that there's potentially, after the conference championship games, there are now potentially four more games before you reach the end of the season for those teams, which is a considerable, amount of additional football to be played, and you have certain players or teams, right, in other sports like in basketball or volleyball or whatever, right, where their team really shines in the playoffs, right, or a particular player does, and they're not so good in the regular season. Maybe that might become more of a thing in college football as well.
Right. Exactly.
So
I think that hopefully, but yeah. So are we ready to talk about this new 12-team playoff?
yep. So the official rules for how it's going to be structured are: it will be the six highest ranked conference champions, plus the six highest other teams from just the general ranking. So six highest teams that are not conference champions will also be included. And the top four seeded teams get a bye, while the other eight will play each other. And in those first round of games, the team that is the higher seed will get to play at their home stadium, which is something that I like and I'm excited about. But this was the most interesting bit of how it's structured to me, that the top four is not the top four highest ranked teams per se, it's the top four highest ranked conference champions. Now,
Exactly.
you would assume that in most years, the top four highest ranked teams would be conference champions, right? But we've just seen in this year, in some of these structures of what it would look like this year, that would mean that the top four would be Georgia, Michigan, Clemson, and
No, it'd
Utah,
be
I
and
believe.
Utah. Right.
Right.
Exactly
Because
right.
because the other teams, Ohio State and TCU, aren't conference champions, right? Uh,
Correct.
so I personally like that because, to your point from earlier, the conference championship game is, going to be just a play-in basically for seeding, most likely for most of those teams. But it's particularly important because you only get to have the bye if you're a conference champion. So I think that
And
helps
you're
it.
one of the top four highest conference champions. So you could be a conference champion, but you're fifth or sixth highest, and it's not going to matter.
Right. And of course, by making it 6 conference champions, right, we have the Power Five conference, which basically guarantees that every year there'll be at least one team from the group of five, whoever's the best out of that group, that will be
Right.
included, which is something that we had predicted in the past that would be necessary in order for this expanded playoff to happen.
Right. And if one of the Power Fives kind of dramatically reorganizes, right, then in all likelihood, that reorganization or whatever is going to create a new conference that will take its place, or one of the group of five will be cannibalized and disappear as a result of one of the Power Five uh, doing what they do, right?
Right. And I saw an interesting comment from someone online that was basically saying that they don't like how the structure has been so far with the BCS or the top four college football playoff, and there's way too many bowl games. It would have been great if we could have established this 12-team playoff back when like the BCS system got introduced, because then maybe the Big East would have stayed together. If there was a guarantee, right, that their conference champion would be in this playoff,
Right,
and would have kept
right.
it a more national sport rather than as regionalized as it's become, which I thought was interesting.
Yep. No, I think there's truth in that, and it has become way more regionalized. In fact, that's my biggest fear, or has been my biggest fear during this period of time when we've had the college football playoff with 4 teams, is that it has become very southeast centric, and there have been a number of years where, frankly, only your rabid fans like myself and you and others like us would really even be interested in watching a game that was being played by 2 Southeastern Conference schools. Yes, they might be what the college football playoff has determined are the 2 teams to play, and that's fine and dandy, but that's not a nationally interesting game. It's not, unless they've played through a sequence like they're going to now, where they will have had to prove it on the field and beat the conference champions from other conferences and that sort of thing to fight their way to that final game.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I've said in the past that I would have been okay with 8-team playoff personally. I think that would have kind of helped to keep the regular season as being more impactful. Where a single loss can still be a major deal, and stuff like that. But I understand that the winds of change were not blowing in my favor in that regard. So I'm fine with this 12-team playoff. I think it will avoid some of the very frustrating situations we've had, like you say, under the current system, where you'll have 2 teams from a particular conference. In this particular year, it's benefiting the Big Ten, but in most years, it's benefited the SEC. So this will help keep everybody with having a guaranteed stake in the playoff. Though the interesting thing will be those 6 highest rated non-conference champions, right? Because now those rankings will be where all the discussion is, and that's where you could
Yep.
have 3 of those 6 maybe are other SEC schools, right?
SEC team. Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. And I think you're going to see that quite a bit. Um, and that's where how the Big Ten chooses to set up their structure after
USC.
USC and UCLA join the conference is really critical. And in my opinion, the wiser decision for them to make is one that would cause fewer conference games to occur, which is to go back to playing only 8 conference games. Okay. And allow more of our conference teams to get to the magical 9-win total that is needed to be in consideration for, entrance into a 12-team playoff. I
Right.
think if we remain as a 9-team or 9-game conference season, while other conferences, especially the SEC, continue to stay at 8, it will be very detrimental to the Big Ten long term, unless very specifically that the selection procedure is going to take that into account in a way that is beneficial to teams who play more conference games um, rather than less.
Right.
Uh,
Well, and I think that you have an extra argument for it because, like I said, if you're not one of the top four, right, but you're in the playoff, that means you have potentially 4 games added to the end of your season.
exactly.
So to have your regular season have one less, tough game, to have one game out from a non-conference, to kind of give yourself, a mini bye week, right? Somewhere closer to the end of the season, like the SEC does. I don't love it from a watcher of the sport perspective because it's kind of lame to have, a gimme game, in week 10 or whatever. But from a strategic standpoint and remaining competitive, if your competitor conferences are doing it, I think that's the only right option.
Right. So the question boils down to, in the nitty gritty of that agreement, how much detail did they provide to guide whoever's selecting these teams, right? With regard to how they're going to choose those other 6, right? How are those being chosen? And the problem is that they said one thing when they created the 4-team playoff, and then their behavior was different. Okay,
Right.
because when that was all being discussed, there was a clear indication that being a conference champion was going to be held in high regard, and that was going to be very important. And the reason they did that at the time when they were discussing it was because they recognized that that would motivate teams to schedule great competition. That would motivate them to schedule tougher non-conference opponents and or play as many conference games if you're in one of the premier conferences, one of the power conferences, as you possibly could, because then you would have more chance to play prominent teams and have prominent victories. So wins against top teams would be more important. But because so many rankings and all of this, go into, even when you go into things like RPI and things of those, those kinds of rankings that are computer based, they can't take into consideration the human eye test. And so all of that stuff is flawed because it doesn't recognize that, well, um, Louisville is ranked 17th, or Kansas State even is ranked 11th because they've got a lot of wins, right? But if you look at the schedule that Kansas State has played, and then you look at the schedule that Alabama's played, you and I both agree that in all likelihood, if you had the real Alabama team and not some fraction of it because of portal departures, and they were both equally motivated, Alabama would be a significant favorite by Vegas and would win that game more often than not. I think most experts would recognize the difference in talent, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm looking here at the current playoff rankings because if the current system was in place this year, right? So you'd have, all the conference champions plus Tulane, right? Who's the highest
Group of five.
group of 5 conference champion, which then leaves basically, those remaining schools, and you have like I'm seeing you'd have like 3 from the SEC, which is Bama, Georgia, Tennessee. You have 3 from the Big Ten, which is Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. You have 2 from the Pac-12, which would be Utah and USC. 2 from the Big 12, TCU and Kansas State, and then just the one from the ACC, which is Clemson, because the ACC was a little bit weak this year.
But I would argue that whoever, I don't know who the second best team in ACC is, but I bet you that whoever that is would be pretty damn competitive against Tulane, for example.
Right. Well, right. Well, and that'll probably be the controversial bit, especially if the group of 5 team gets in there and then just gets their doors blown off them, right, by whoever they're playing. Because if they're the lowest seed, right, that means they would probably be seed to play the 5th ranked team, right?
Right. Exactly.
So, that might
They're
create a
set up
certain
to fail.
that might create a certain narrative, but at the same time, you might get a year like UCF, right? Under Scott
Yep,
Frost, or BYU has had in the past, where they have an undefeated season and then surprise a team, in the postseason. So, there's
exactly.
excitement possibilities there too.
Absolutely. It's just going to be very interesting, and that's where the devil's in the details, so to speak. And so, as we go forward over these next few months, hopefully, we'll have the opportunity to dive into that detail a little bit in a podcast, Alex, and we'll try to get some, get some articles written by some folks who've had the time and had the access to get the fine print, so to speak, of those details, so these conferences can start to make educated decisions about how they're going to schedule.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Yeah, there'll be, there's a lot to talk about this offseason, that's for sure.
Yes.
So we're going to wrap up the podcast here with some quick Nebraska discussion. Obviously, last time we gave our full breakdown of the Matt Rule hire and all this sort of stuff. And as as seems to happen to us, there was some big news soon after we recorded that particular podcast, which is unfortunately some tragic news, which was that Nebraska's interim head coach, former interim head coach, Mickey Joseph, was arrested last week in Nebraska on allegations of domestic assault and strangulation in terms of his wife. The allegation is that he attacked her, grabbed her hair. She had a swollen eye. So not a good look. Been a rough week for the Nebraska program. And, it makes a tough situation that Matt Rule had in terms of keeping this team together even harder now, because I definitely don't blame any player who feels like they were sold a pack of goods by Mickey Joseph, put on this nice guy act, right, and want to leave and things like that. So, it's a tough situation.
Yes, it is, and it's very sad for everyone involved, and is just devastating, frankly, for the children and that family and what they're having to fight through and battle through emotionally and other ways. But if you just took purely from a business or a career standpoint for a guy that obviously many Nebraska fans like and we're rooting for, this is devastating news for Mickey and his life choices going forward, and the missed opportunities that this will represent for him in his life.
Mm-hmm. I did say to you when it happened, thank God that we got Matt Rule, hired that particular weekend, because if this had happened while Mickey was still the top guy, before we had brought in somebody else, it would have been even more damaging to the university than it already is.
I agree. I think we barely missed an oncoming train.
Yeah, seems that way. Also, on the previous podcast, we discussed various possibilities for Matt Rule's assistants. There were a lot of rumors rolling around about, who he's worked with in the past and things like that. And after the podcast, some of those did get confirmed. So we have E.J. Bartel as running backs coach, Corey Campbell as strength and conditioning, Evan Cooper for secondary, Ed Foley for special teams coordinator, Terrence Knighton for defensive line, and Marcus Satterfield for offensive coordinator. A lot of those names we discussed on the previous podcast, so it was just kind of confirmation of what we've been hearing. It seems like Matt Rule is kind of going out to his coaching tree and getting the guys that have worked with him in the past.
Right, which makes a lot of sense, and we'll get into that on a later podcast once this staff is fully completed, and but there's already enough information out there to point to the fact that he's prioritizing people who have coached with him before, or in large degree know what his coaching style is, because he knows himself well enough to know that he's very demanding. He's made that clear from the very get-go, and he also understands that this is a rebuild that he's in the process of, and he's taking that rebuild approach, which is not the shortcuts, but we're going to build this thing from the ground up mentality. And that requires a certain grinder kind of coach, a guy who's really willing to dedicate the time and the effort to do all the little things from the very get go, and not try to cut corners by, putting all your eggs into the basket of getting a 5-star player. And that sounds great. And if you do it, that's great. But if you try it and you don't get it, then you just put your program behind. Well, Rule is more inclined to go after guys that meet his criteria and then build them.
Right. And the last thing we'll talk about here is a topic from our last podcast, which was Bill Busch, who was the other coach from the previous staff who we thought had a chance to potentially stick around, even if it was in some sort of analyst position, not a fully hired coach. However, with the Mickey Joseph situation, I think that changes things both for Bill and for Matt. In terms of is anybody who was now with that era of the program kind of tainted a bit in his mind, even if not to say that they, had anything to do with Mickey's actions, but just that you want a clean break from something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not exactly. That was a very complicated question you just asked, I feel. So I'm not sure I have an answer.
Do you think there's what are the percentage chance you think Bill Busch sticks around, and is it lower now? Let's go with that.
Oh, because of Mickey, though, is what you're saying.
Right.
Gotcha. I don't think so. I think that those would have been viewed independently by Coach Rule. I really do. I don't think that would have influenced his decision to yay or nay on anybody else on the staff. I think he is going to end up keeping someone from the staff. He's already made the decision not to stick with Bill Busch, at least not in a coaching role. I mean, depending on what Bill Busch wants to do and what opportunities he's presented with, the idea of maybe him moving back into an analyst role, which he had last year, might be a possibility for him. And there are some reasons for that, which we could get into in a future podcast where he might be willing to do that. But bottom line is I know that, as we're doing this podcast, Donovan Riala, our offensive line coach, is still being paid by the university. So the termination hasn't happened yet. Now that might just be because Matt hasn't yet named his offensive line coach. And so until that time, good to keep Donovan around so that Donovan can, maintain communications with recruits and things of that nature. And I know he was considering a number of different coaches. The idea of keeping at least one guy that's from the existing staff and has some kind of connection to Nebraska would probably be a good thing. I don't know if Donovan's that guy, but at this point, it looks like he kind of fits Rule's profile. He's relatively young. He's moldable as an assistant coach. He's got a great history as a player and spent some time in the league with the Chicago Bears. He's got some of the elements that obviously Rule has prioritized in his other hires. So it would kind of make sense that Rule might look at a guy like that and say, hey, he's a guy I could stick around, that I'd like to have stick around because I have a feeling I can mold him into a great offensive line coach. Because Matt Rule has some history being an offensive line coach himself. So if you're going to mentor somebody, that might be the guy to choose, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that, though, because the offensive line has been so bad this year, and we have been critical of his kind of, decisions with the offensive line, like making our guys too big and things of that nature.
Well, those weren't his decisions, but the ones I would be critical of him on is his rotation, right? How long he stayed with players before he made changes, things of that nature. And again, some of that may have been being driven up the chain, right? Donovan was a first-year assistant on the staff, so he might have been being directed by his offensive coordinator and by his head coach, in terms of which guys he was expected to play. And he also had, two of his better linemen basically injured and gone one injured and unavailable, and the other one unavailable because of a stupid supplement error that he made. Not a steroid, but a supplement that was still considered illegal by the NCAA that ended up causing him to be, suspended for the year. And he was just not working with much talent.
Mm-hmm.
So do we blame that on him with 1 year? I don't know. But bottom line is, you're right. I think, generally speaking, if he ends up being the choice, Nebraska fans will be disappointed because it's not the new shiny toy. It's something we already know. And the results that we have so far from that particular coach's efforts were not stellar.
Right. Yep. So yeah, I will, like we said, we'll see where we come down on Matt Rule's other assistant coaches, his full staff, and I know there's been news about transfers out of the program, new commits on recruiting. There's a lot going on there, so we'll maybe do a breakdown of that in a future podcast here as we get close to the end of the year.
That sounds like a good plan.
All right. So if all you out there enjoyed listening to this episode, you can reach out to us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you search for College Football Throwdown, you can leave us a rating and review there. We always love hearing from the fans. So thank you all out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.